Okay, so welcome to the Node.js package maintenance team meeting for May 5th, 2020. We will follow the issue which was in the agenda. It is number 354, if anybody wants to find it. And before we get started, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, if we don't have any announcements, I'm going to paste the link to the minutes so people can add themselves to the chat here. And then I will move on to the issues which were tagged for the agenda. Sorry, just finishing up minutes there in the last section. Okay, so the first one is number 335. I opened this one. And it's just a suggestion as to whether we should submit a topic for the Collaborator Summit. And actually, I think I might have opened a duplicate somewhere, but it is the time, I think, for us to figure out whether we want to do a submission, and if so, do we have a volunteer for creating and submitting it?
So I had a question. I sort of had to check out, unfortunately, of the Collab Summit planning stuff. With the current state, is it going to be, I assume, remote? So what is the structure of what a session would look like?
That's probably a good question. I haven't looked in detail enough myself. What I do understand so far is it's going to be over, the summit's going to be over 3 days, with one of the days being, I think, more focused on new collaborators, and across project getting people involved. One of the days is going to be a focus on sort of cross-project CPC discussions, for teams working together. And then the other one will be for each of the projects to, basically have sessions of interest of topics. So in parallel, I think, is my understanding, for different projects to have topics on things of interest to themselves. I'm guessing the timeline would still be, kind of hour, maybe hour and a half type sessions. And the last thing, as I understand, is it's going to be the same time like Austin time. And I think the last thing I remember was, shorter each day, so maybe 4 hours each day in the middle of that Austin time. But we can look that up in the Summit repo. I don't know if anybody else has more details, different details to add.
So I think we have quite a lot to say, Wes. I mean, if you think back to what your expectations were last time, and I keep quoting you, it's like just one triage, just one. That's all you wanted, like one person to reliably turn up and close issues that said Express was broken. And we've got quite a lot now. And there's quite a lot to actually talk about. I mean, if we actually try, people put the effort in, we can get people to join in, and they're happy to join in. It's just a case of it does use up our, after work time. And I think you should talk about, does it sound like I'm volunteering you, Wes?
If you are, that's great.
Right.
I was actually, but I'm willing to stand with you remotely from my basement.
Yeah, and I think I had planned on doing another similar thing. Just, life can get in the way. I'd be happy to. I'm interested in, so one of the reasons why I think we got the engagement we did is partly because it was in person. So yes. I totally think we can get a large group of people to attend something. I'm interested to see whether we'll have the same long-term efficacy out of a remote event. And that's sort of why I asked the question for us running one for the package maintenance working group, irregardless of the Express stuff, because we already do a lot of remote meetings, and we do the same thing for the Express and triage stuff lately, at least. And I'm just interested to see if people think how effective. I mean, I think we should run something. I'm just thinking, should we consider it being remote as like a big factor in what we decide to do.
I think it would be good, like if you're asking, like, should we try and optimize for the fact that it's remote? I'd agree. I guess we should also think about, like, it's an opportunity perhaps to get a broader audience than we normally get, right? Because otherwise, you know, if it's going to be a 1 hour session and it's going to be just the same people that we have on this call, then your point about how much different is it is a good one. If we think about it as an opportunity to try and find new people who are interested in it, you know, then that's maybe one angle that makes more sense.
Yeah, that would make more sense to me as well. Unless we wanted to do like a specific deep dive on a topic. Like that'd be the only other format where I think it would be meaningfully different from just our normal weekly, bi-weekly meetings or whatever they are.
And it might be some combination of the two. I know we did it at one, the one in Germany, I think it was, where we had a little bit of context setting up front, and then there was 1 or 2 topics that we dove into more detail. And, you know, we could treat it as a working session for the people here, but also then potentially get more and, you know, different views into those areas as well.
Yes, and I think, again, we should try and highlight the positive light and try and take the learnings that we've got. So we can get people on board to maintain a project. There's lots of things we're doing as a group. We're looking at dependence. We can like highlight the work that everyone is doing there. But we want to have a story, like the story we can present remotely. Like we can go in, we've been into Express, there's an on-ramp for help, there's an off-ramp. You know, you can do it for a year. You're not signing up for life. It's not like a baby. You know, there is an exit strategy. Well, my babies are 16 and 19 now. It's a long-term plan, you know, so it's shorter than that. I think we actually ought to, you know, accent the positive. There's a lot of work the community is doing. We should say, hey, these are some of the rules we've come up with. This is an example project. And perhaps whereas we should start talking about other projects to do. Just doing the Express one has really limited my time in this group. And now I have a new sort of admiration for people who maintain stuff, especially other people's stuff, because that's hard. But, you know, there was some mention of the Axios project as being another project that might need assistance that's widely used. And we might want to look at a second thing that people recognize in that.
This idea sounds really interesting to me because one thing about the Collaborator Summit that might be an interesting and more unique opportunity is to talk with some of the other OpenJS projects and see if any of them are interested. And we could specifically, in that regard, we could specifically tailor the conversation to, hey, other project maintainers, here's the things we've done in Express. And I guess Express is the main, you know, example we have, but, you know, we're supposed to be working with MQTT as well in the quote unquote pilot. But I think that has maybe petered off. So anyway, my point is we could present what we are doing as a group with Express sort of as the example and say, how many of you, you know, would be interested in working with us on something like this? Do you have any feedback? You know, like something that makes more sense in the Collaborator Summit structure, you know, and that to me sounds like a pretty good fit.
This is Owen. I had just a quick thought on, well, since Axios was mentioned, there was that issue where one of their contributors had reached out seeking some support from the package maintenance team. And from one of our last discussions, not that we wouldn't be happy to provide that help, but one of the key factors that we identified with that project was that their maintainer, for lack of a better word, was AWOL. And so I wonder if we do, whether it's Axios or somebody else, I suppose making sure that, we get buy-in from the maintainer up front and center, or up front, seems, I guess, important in light of, that it would be great to help Axios, but without support from the maintainer, how far could we get?
Yeah, we kind of identified that we need like a champion maintainer or something like that, right?
Yeah, and you know what? This might be a really great opportunity to, if we do structure something of, hey, here's the things the package maintenance working group is offering to maintainers. And then if we specifically invite the Axios maintainers, that might be like a decent way to, also kick off that conversation in a more concrete fashion, as well as talk to the other, OpenJS Foundation projects and maintainers who, will be present. That seems like I think it would sort of kill two birds with one stone there, right?
Yes, agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So it kind of sounds like we're in agreement that it makes sense to submit something. I think I heard Glenn volunteer.
No, you've heard me volunteering Wes to stand with Wes.
Okay, I am definitely on board to co-present something.
Okay.
Writing the proposal, I probably wouldn't be able to get to this week. And I know we're getting toward the deadline, right?
I'm not sure there's a deadline, to be honest.
Okay.
But it's kind of a, they're always asking the sooner the better because they got to start planning and arranging. But we're still 6 weeks out, 7 weeks out. So I don't think 1 week is an issue one way or the other. But just we should make sure we do it in the next few weeks is kind of my take.
As long as that's all right, then I can volunteer. It'll probably be this weekend or early next week.
Okay. So is the plan you'd open an issue saying here's what we submit and people can comment?
Well, so I was actually thinking we would just open I think it's probably reasonable just to open the issue straight on, because I think the issues on the repo we can just mark it as draft or something. Hold on, I was going to go take a look because I thought
that actually would work.
And I think there's a template over there we need to follow. So if we just open the issue on that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, so yeah, no. I'm just taking the notes. So Wes will volunteer to open issue for session and to get people to comment or to let people know when it's there. Let team members know when it's there.
Yeah, I will. So the one issue, and I ran into this just the other day with the PKGJS org, I couldn't tag, and I don't know if this is a GitHub limitation, but I couldn't tag the package maintenance team on the other org.
Yeah, I don't think you can do that.
That's a limitation. Yeah, you can't tag cross org.
You'd have to add another one there for it to maintain, for it to keep that parity.
So I can open another issue. I'll open an issue back on package maintenance with the link.
There actually is there is an issue. That's the one that was 335. So I think if you just paste that the issue, the link for the issue you open, and then mention the team in that issue, that should probably do the trick.
Yeah, perfect. I'll do that.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. So anything more before we move on to the next issue? Okay, the next one is number 327. And that is org for WG supported tooling. We've had quite a bit of discussion back and forth in terms of the governance, I think, to start with, right? Or is this related to that? Yeah. No, sorry, that's the next one. Dependence tooling, sorry, Andrew.
No problem. So I think this issue, latest update on this issue was just to create the new repo over at PKGJS. I haven't got a chance to start looking at the tool since last meeting, but where's the So the new repository issue is 352.
Okay.
And I think the main discussion here was, well, we need a name. So I like Jordan's idea of Will I Break You? But if anyone else has any other suggestions.
Sorry, what was that? It was
Will I Break You?
Will I Break You? Okay.
I assume we're going to go for the shorthand, Wibby. I mean, if there's no objections, we can just create it. Are we going for the dashes or just the acronym?
Maybe go for the acronym.
Maybe it is.
Cool. Okay. I think. Yeah.
Okay. No object. I'm just gonna say no objections. I was just pasting that into that issue, but I should just write that in the minutes instead. Hold on. So basically, no, that's what we've agreed. And there's no objections from anybody who's here, right? Okay. Okay, so if that's it for that one, let's move on to the next issue, which is PKGS.org for supported tooling, number 271. So I guess that's the one where I think most of the discussion has been around the governance so far.
I don't think technically it's been in this one, but I think it should be linked from here. So
Right.
your PR is, sorry, lots of scrolling.
338.
Yep, there it is, 338.
Just gonna paste that into the minutes as well.
So this sort of overlaps a little bit as well with what I added on the meeting note, which is Tierney brought up this sheriff package. Do we want to talk about that maybe at the same time here? Since there is some component of how we manage the access rights.
Okay, I didn't see the comment on the issue, but if you want to give us some context and it's related, makes sense.
Maybe.
You want me to do that, Wes?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. So a bit ago, I was talking with Electron, and they, they've had a repo management tool or org management tool for quite some time that they've been working on, and they've used relatively successfully for Electron and keeping it locked down. It basically is a bot that they've set up to deploy to Heroku, but can be deployed anywhere. That configures and manages GitHub organization permissions, repo permissions, repo creation. So like if you want to create a new repo, you PR it in, stuff like that from a single YAML file in a single repo. It also integrates with Slack. So they use it pretty aggressively to monitor when things aren't how they should be. So it'll kind of, be the sheriff and tell you when something's wrong and allow you to go fix it. So like, if someone created a repo they shouldn't have, it'll start yelling at you in Slack, I think every 10 minutes. Or, it'll say this person's access level was changed from like member to admin in a way that like someone manually went and did this when that should never be the case. So yeah, it does that and does it pretty well. The Slack integration is optional, and I believe they have Google G Suite integration too, because they actually have SSO enabled for their GitHub. So they, I believe, are actually controlling the Google permissions through G Suite or through Sheriff as well, although I could be wrong on that. So yeah, that's what it does. Pretty straightforward to set up. It's a simple Express app, and yeah.
So the questions I had that were sort of open, I think there was really just three maybe. Okay, so one is, does this matter for the charter sake? Like, do we need to know the details of how we're going to manage it to include in the charter? because then it maybe doesn't need to happen in this conversation. The second one is NPM publish management would be probably another feature we would want, maybe not need, but want. And then lastly would be who would run the instance. Kieran, I know you mentioned maybe something about some donated hardware, but I just want to make sure we have that out in the air or open.
Are those questions for me or in general?
I think in general, I think the first one is definitely in general. Is like, do we think we need to know about the details of how we're going to manage the access before? Because some of the language, I guess my point is, some of the language in the charter does sort of get to details, and if we think we need to nail down all those details now, then we need to have this conversation. But it might make more sense to remove those details and just say it will be managed by the package maintenance team, details to be determined or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the charter should have specific. The charter doesn't need to have specifics of how you're going to do things. Just needs to cover what kind of controls and like who's going to be able to do what and how you become one of those people. Sometimes it's easier just to describe it in the details, right? But that it certainly doesn't need to be.
I think the charter describes things like the tool itself. It does not matter that much, right? The charter describes like if you want a new repo, then you open an issue in package maintenance. I mean, we could reward it. Then you open a pull request against the YAML file, which generates the repo, right? But I don't think that either of those things matters, because you could just start with an issue on package maintenance, which results in APR, which when gets merged automatically merges the issue, and we can enforce the timing stuff.
The other thing too is we can change the charter, right? Like it's not, the kind of changes to the charter that might be more difficult is if it's like we said, okay, we're going to have, you know, a smaller group of people who can create repos versus anybody who can create repos, and we'll just to become one of the people who can create repos, just raise an issue and you're in automatically, right? But as it's more the level of sort of control and and how things are going to be managed, not the specifics that even if we had to make a change, I think would be an issue.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So that answers that question. I guess the NPM publish thing is sort of maybe not an issue we need to actually discuss. Just we should probably open an issue on their repo and say, hey, would this be something you'd be interested in us either working on or you just doing?
I can't say that they might accept that as a contribution as like a plugin. You also brought up when Wes and I were discussing it, there's the possibility of using it as a middleware for Express. And then also they probably won't actively do that just because they have their own system that they've already built that's like relatively comprehensive for NPM publishing that's not tied into that at all. But I don't think they would be opposed to having a plugin that they just don't enable.
I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with how it's structured, but how hard would it be to, like, does it have to be an application that's running somewhere on an instance?
Yeah.
Because that implies monitoring. Can it not be converted into a CLI tool or something like that? Because if it's a CLI tool, then you can do it in GitHub Actions. You can do it locally.
Right.
So it's an Express server. You could, at that point, you basically end up just forking it and kind of pulling some of the bits of logic, but starting from scratch, which, I think that's fine, but I think part of the point, or at least the utility I see in it, is shared infrastructure with other foundation projects.
Is there anything that prevents it from just being run periodically, like through a GitHub action, have it come up, have it run for a minute?
There is, I think.
So
I was sort of digging through it a little bit. Also, I'm not super TypeScript proficient, so maybe I'm wrong in some of my conclusions here, but partly the reason it does this is because it is running as like a Slack bot as well, so it needs to have a bunch of persistent stuff. I mean, I guess in theory, and it's listening for webhook calls. So I guess in theory, and it's listening for webhook calls from more than just GitHub. So in an action, you can hook into GitHub Actions on a webhook. But I don't know how we would go about doing that for some of the other integrations. And that might be something that breaks their version of it. Again, we could maybe take some sort of slimmed down version, but then at that point we've probably either looked at forking it. The only other option would be take all of the internals, pull them out, wrap them in something that both of us could use, and then they would just use the Express version of it, and we would just use the CLI version. Any of those options are a fair bit of work. Somebody would have to volunteer to do and carve out time for.
Yeah, and I think that probably takes away a lot of the value of like using a shared piece. Is like it already exists and works to some extent. And like, I guess, is this coming from like a concern about having a server somewhere? Is that where that kind of question is coming from?
Yeah.
And I guess for that question, is that we don't know how to get a server, or like we don't know how we do that effectively, or is that we don't want to maintain one at all?
It's a liability because someone has to own it. If someone has to own it, and then that person, the whole thing of the package maintenance things, we don't want any maintenance. Like.
Yeah, like it takes.
And then you have to secure the tokens, and you have to do I have a server.
Somebody has to understand it.
I can give you my server. I can give you a virtual machine on my server, but that's, I think,
But then there's updates, right? And you have to understand it. And if it's not working, who's going to answer questions about it not working? And
I would add that there's a disclaimer at the bottom that says you should have alerting set up in case the cron job fails, because it will die on unexpected state in GitHub or other things. So I could see that as, well, who maintains the maintainers, understood. But I think it's certainly a compelling idea. And, in terms of like, could other teams take advantage of it? So I don't know if there's just a way to maybe use the package maintenance to provide visibility, or maybe it's an opportunity to like fork and try it out in PKGS and, make modifications and maybe submit back, and see if there's a CLI/Lambda/GitHub Actions flavor that could work alongside it or as an option to it. But
So for what it's worth, I think what you're saying, and this is now becoming more and more common. I've seen it in a few other projects as well, where people have, because we didn't have things like, we had things like GitHub Actions, but we didn't specifically have GitHub Actions. So people have a ton of things that run as bots, and they're very interesting, but all of them require some sort of server somewhere. So I think this is a really common thing that we'll need to look at when we're looking at these type of tools moving forward, whether it's for PKGJS or for just recommending to maintainer groups. So it might be nice for us also to see if there's any good like proof of concepts of taking some of these services. So like I'm thinking specifically about Release Please, which is something Ben Coe does for Google, and it's like a release flow process thing, and he demoed it to me, and I've looked at the code a bunch, and it's really interesting, but it also runs as a bot. And so thinking about doing that on Express was sort of a no-go for the exact same reason. So I think one thing we could do is like see if anybody has any really quality examples of something that used to operate as a bot and now operates as a GitHub action, and see if we can then go shop that idea around to some of these maintainers of these tools that we'd like to either integrate or recommend to other ecosystems, because it really does lower the barrier if it's just a GitHub action, like significantly so. Yeah, that's the end of my soapbox on that particular topic.
So I guess what I'd suggest is, like, I don't think that's related necessarily to this issue, like trying to get to the point where we've got the charter approved and the other issues. it's an interesting thing in terms, there's a bunch of different aspects, like Owen mentions. If if it would be useful for maintainers, then actually if we had a champion in the team, maybe we should experiment on ourselves, right, to learn more about it and see how it works and be able to explain it. But I do think that would require somebody who sort of says, yeah, I'm going to own this and help keep it going, right? And otherwise, like, other ideas are like Wes said, maybe we can, another thing to kind of have as if we have somebody who can champion is, well, this kind of class of tools, how do we help move them to the point where it's easier to consume them, right?
Yeah, like if
Also,
we could, go ahead.
I don't know if anybody's once again familiar with this more, but at the very bottom of the shelf, there's 2 known limitations: not capable of inviting people and not capable of creating repositories. Is this simply because of the lack of time? Is that an opportunity for contributing to this package?
I would believe so, yeah. They're generally very open to contribution, very friendly and helpful in getting people through to the finish line.
I know I haven't looked at the code at all, but those 2
Yeah.
things don't look like they are big things to add, which means that it's a sort of good way to try to get to learn the tool.
The code is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to lie. It only took me a few minutes to sort of crack it open and understand the general, concepts in it. So would definitely be a good first contribution, I think, for somebody. To Michael's point, though, maybe we should get back on topic, because that's quite a bit of a tangent from what do we need to do to land the charter.
Right. So yeah. So let's get back to, the first step is getting it into a form that our team is happy enough with, and then we can propose it in the propose it as an actual here we want to be chartered under this particular charter. So I don't know if there was any if there's any sort of controversial or areas that we should dive into in terms of trying to get to agreement.
I think the only stuff that was unclear to me in terms of wording, and I know we touched on it, but then I'm not sure if we resolved it because there were a lot of comments and I haven't read the whole thing. Is it okay for a maintainer to merge their own PRs, or do we always have to wait for one other maintainer?
Everywhere else, it's usually at least one other, if you're going to have a requirement for a number of reviewers, right?
I've always set it up so that if a project, the only time you can merge your own PRs is if you're the only maintainer on the project. Otherwise, I've turned on branch protections so that you're forced to have someone else review it.
Depends on if you believe in karma or not.
I think the way it's written, though, we had a 72 hours, right?
We do. I would really be a big fan of that change, which I don't think got brought up specifically, which is if you are the only maintainer, you are allowed to. I'm pretty sure the way it's worded in the draft and even in all the comments we've made was really the distinction between 2 and 1 other maintainer. But I think I'd be definitely on board with Jordan's recommendation. Well, most of the recommendation. I'm not a huge fan of force blocking, just because that just means that if there's an emergency and you're the only one available and you have to do it.
GitHub now has solved that. So you can turn on the branch protection for master, require review, require rebasing, but you can also check the allow force pushes box, which means that in an emergency, you can override the branch protections, but by default, you have to have the review.
Okay, I haven't worked with it yet, so I don't know, but that would be fine.
Even then, you can, if you have a pull request, you can merge and it says
use you can check the extra thing that says right. But by doing it that way, it becomes very apparent to everyone, to every maintainer, that you're not supposed to be doing this. You just have the superpower.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, which I think is it's good to both allow it and also make it scary.
Right. Yeah, we haven't.
That's been my general sense anyway.
The wording today doesn't say anything about. It just says it needs to have one approval, but I always assumed an approval is somebody other than yourself.
Right. And actually, even on all of my repos that have, you cannot.
No, okay.
But on repos where I'm the only maintainer, on those, I still all enable the branch protections and allow force pushing. So I still, in other words, require myself to explicitly override that, like, it's up to date, the tests have passed, etc. I just don't require review.
Yeah, I think that's good practice. Do we then, okay, should we then, I think that we should change the wording that it requires one other person than the reviewer. But there's sometimes multiple persons pushing into pull requests, and then, but if there's two, the way we have phrased it at work is every PR has to have two sets of eyes, which is excluding people who only have one or fewer eyes. Okay. Not funny. But I think we should reword it one other person, at least one other person. Do we then need to define how we're going to nominate repos as single maintainer? Because I know we certainly have some where nobody else has looked than the original person.
So I would actually go the other way, right? We would, I think single maintainer is the default. Like the person who opens the issue saying, hey, I want to make a repo, they're now the single maintainer. It takes another person saying, I want to help maintain, or, you know, some otherwise being nominated to become not a single maintainer, right? Like, so the wording, I think, would be.
The wording can be like, if there is only a single maintainer, either because you're the only one to start, or you've gone to 2 and then go back down to 1. That shouldn't matter, right? I think it should be just, if there is only one, then you can do it.
I guess what I meant was we should have wording on how to add maintainers,
right,
knowing that it doesn't matter whether you've started with one and never gotten another, or whether you had some and they are no longer participating. Like either way, right? The point is, how do we add new people onto that?
And I think that's in there somewhere. There's some, because I'm pretty sure. Okay.
And in the future, not now, we'll probably want to add something that says, like, somebody who has maintainer rights but is not responsive counts as not being a maintainer for the purposes of review, or something like that.
So one of the things we did on, well, we are trying to do on the web server frameworks team, and it might work here as well. And I have the start of the automation in PKG.js for this, is GitHub Action, which will manage this for us. So in that regard, what it does is it looks at all activity across the project. And then if a person on the team has no activity within the given time span, so we've set that at 6 months, it will open an issue removing them. And then that just gives them the opportunity to say, no, I'm sorry, I've just been busy. And one piece of activity like cancels the removal. Obviously we need to finish that automation, but that would be one way we could do the same thing here, which would be, you know, have a list in each repo of the maintainers, and then have a GitHub action that's just enabled on all of them to sort of automate management.
Right, that's actually going, like, currently this just says that administrative members are given them, and this is where, like, okay, I think I tried to take the simplest approach as opposed to letting each repo be managed separately. I just said administrative members are given the maintainer role. They're the ones who can actually add and remove people from that team. It doesn't actually talk to the process in terms of, like, you know, do you open an issue? Does it require any approvals? I think it's basically saying we trust the administrative members to add and remove the people appropriately. And then we could then use that to, you know, define processes that the administrative people say, okay, once this happens, then I'm going to go and do it. But that level doesn't necessarily need to be in the charter, right? This is more just in the charter. It's outlining who is going to be able to do that kind of thing. If we then wanted to make that automated, I don't know if that really changes things. Like, certainly the removal, the way you talked about it, it's still a PR, right? So the PR might land, somebody would still have to go and say, okay, I'm going to take you out of this team.
Yeah, exactly. I'm definitely on board now, especially now that we've had the conversation on Sheriff as well, that we just try to steer clear of, like, codifying any particular solution for managing this in the charter. I think that's good. The one thing that I do think is missing in this then is when people are added, are they added other than administrators? Obviously, those are
Right.
across the whole org. Do we add people on a repo by repo basis or across the org? So today, just because I've been the only one doing it, it's been across the whole org, right? I just add you as a member, not an administrative member, right? So you still can't
Right. Yeah.
add or remove people from teams, or maybe you can't delete repos. I don't know. It's whatever the owner role. I think I still might be the only one, or maybe Michael, I added you. I added somebody else, I think, as owner.
Right.
So the answer to your question, Wes, depends on what our policy wants to be about adding people to the org itself. So because you can only use teams with org members. Teams are a superior way to organize permissions, but GitHub does not allow you to use teams unless someone's in the org. So, and you can't have cross-org teams, as we talked about earlier. So like, if we want every maintainer of one of our packages to be added to the package.js org, which doesn't necessarily have to give them any permissions, then cool, we should add them that way, and they should be added to the team for that package. And we can use parent-child teams as needed and so on. And we should strive to avoid individuals being added onto a repo. But that whole model breaks down pretty much as soon as you have more than a handful of people outside the org having access to repos, at which point you might as well just do it. You know, you either write a tool to fake the teams, like, and automate it, or you just do it by hand, one at a time.
So why does it break down when when you say out of the org? So I think the idea would be we add everybody to the org, which I think is your first case, right?
Yeah. So if we do that, it's simple, because then everyone can just be put into an appropriate team, and that way the repo management are the teams correct, and the team management is a much smaller, simpler question to answer, and it's easier to keep the teams in sync and not have to check all the repos and so on. I was just pointing out that if we don't go with that, adding everyone to the org, then there's complications of you have multiple sources of truth of who has access to the repo.
Okay. And then I think also if we did go the sheriff route, that probably has some sort of structure that it follows, which is probably
I believe it's that structure.
Is it? Okay.
I could be wrong, but that's my understanding, is that it's team-based as well.
Okay. And then, yeah, so sheriff sounds like it makes it even easier with the first option. It maybe then sounds like it's not an option if we don't add everyone to the org.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm cool with adding everyone to the org. It's just that affects billing potentially, although the recent pricing changes and stuff might make that less of a problem. And then it allows people to put the org badge on their profile. So like, that's not a huge deal, but depends on who the people are, I suppose.
It's a good thing to,
right.
help give visibility.
I lean towards that.
I definitely think that all of these things, we should figure out a way to phrase the charter such that these are not in them.
Right.
I think the only thing we would have to say is, other than administrators, access is granted per repo or something, and then we can figure out like what that means. Details after, right?
Yeah, I think what this says, the way it's currently written, it basically says the maintainers who are going to be able to, it currently is written as like one set of maintainers across all the repos. And then the admin members from the package maintenance team are the administrators who control who can be in that particular team. If we want to have it be the flip would be, there is multiple teams, one for every individual repo, and then you could still go, you could still stick with the administrative members are added to all of those, and so it's still the administrative members who can decide who can be added or removed from the individual teams, but then you control access individually as opposed to across the repos.
So my suggestion would strongly be multiple teams. The Browserify org has been managed in the sense that everyone in the org gets permissions to everything. But what that also means is that I get listed as the maintainer on like 30 NPM packages that I don't touch or have context on. And so I've slowly started to make some teams in the NPM org, but also in the GitHub org for that. And similarly, like it's nice to give people access and trust them that they'll use it well. But at the same time, if somebody doesn't need it, you don't want to like hand them keys to things. it also like increases the exposure for like I don't know, if somebody like gets their account phished or something.
Especially if we start doing automated NPM publish
Right.
credentials. So
Right.
that's why I think it's just safer to me. And I don't think there's not that many people. Like we could go in and set up teams for everything and add the appropriate people today in like the next 30 minutes and be done with it probably for a while, like other than, the, random addition or removal, which is really easy. So to be honest, I think as long as we just state explicitly access is managed per repo other than the administrators who get access to everything, then like I think we're probably safe as far as the charter goes.
Yeah, I think we can say it's probably that we're going to create a new team for each. Like the easiest way and concrete, now it does have some of the details, but basically when we create a new repo, we're going to create a new team, which is the repo name -maintainers. And then we can have used the similar language that says, so maintainers for the repositories in the PKG repo are managed through one team per repo, which is named as blah. And then the next line that says, the administrative members are given the maintainer role for those teams. So it's still the same set of people who will control. Like the only thing that doesn't allow for is if we want to let, a maintainer who's not an administrative member now become, somebody who can change the list of maintainers.
And we can still do that with, you can still make somebody a maintainer of a team, even if they don't have admin.
Well, technically you can, but I'm just saying the governance wouldn't be allowing for that, right? Because it's saying
it would be ideal for the
who could do
governance
it.
to allow us to do whatever GitHub lets us do. I think that we should find a way to word it so that as GitHub ships a new feature, we don't have to like change the governance document to be able to use a new feature. Like the government, in my opinion, the government.
I would agree, but I don't agree with
spirit.
the let you do anything. Because
yeah,
a little
so
bit
let me
about the
rephrase.
governance is the governance part is a little bit to say, you're letting us manage an org on behalf of the node project.
That's fair.
We're going to do it in this context, in a responsible way. Now, anything could be responsible, but anything you can do with GitHub doesn't narrow that down enough.
What I mean is we should make the obstacle not be that the feature is not in the governance doc. The obstacle should be that the thing you're trying to do and not allowed to do is something that we don't want you doing, right? And so I would hope that the mechanism then for laying out those boundaries is not delineating features on a website, but is instead talking about conceptually what we want to do or not do.
Yeah, so that line we could adjust to say, administrative members are given the maintainer role for the team and can add or remove members as appropriate. In addition, based on consensus, based on the consensus of administrative members, additional maintainers can be added to that team or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. If we think there's going to be cases where, again, like the administrative members who have the responsibility could then say, well, okay, well, we trust this other person to also be a maintainer and pass that on would be, I think, reasonable to write in there.
Right.
So that would circumvent the administrator for once, right? That's what you're saying, right? So that would maintainers can add more maintainers.
No. I was more of the, that would be an option, but more what I was thinking was that in addition to the administrative members being added and being maintainers, the administrative members have the right to nominate additional maintainers, right? So it's not that just once you're a maintainer, you get to add more maintainers, but that the people who are currently written there as the ones who are maintainers, well, administrative members who we've called out as like a group, they can nominate people who are not administrative members to also be maintainers in addition to themselves. I guess I can see I'm not explaining it.
Well, I'm wondering if maybe, so wouldn't we want people to just self-nominate for that? Right?
To become a maintainer?
I want to be.
Sure, but then who it comes down to who is able, like who is a maintainer in GitHub and is actually allowed to add them into the team.
So I assumed that was the administrative people only after a PR was opened on the package maintenance repo.
The way it's currently written, the administrative members, yes, need to approve that PR, and they would go in and do that. The question I thought Jordan was saying is, we might want to allow somebody else to add a maintainer to a team who's not an administrative member. And currently the governance wouldn't allow for that. So we would need to add something if we want to do that as well.
Do you have Jordan, is that what you were thinking? And do you have a reason why that would be better?
So in general, like, I have in the past found myself in a situation where I have NPM ownership of a package, but I'm not an admin on the repo. That has not, and the reason given for that was a corporate thing about, like, I wasn't an employee of the company and they only wanted employees to be admins. But it really just didn't hold up to logical scrutiny, because all of the damage I could do to the company was via the NPM package and not the GitHub repo, because on NPM there's not granular permissions. So I can publish whatever I want, pointing to whatever repo I want, and the company looks just as bad, right? Like, essentially, it seemed like somebody just made a policy decision that was not actually considering the intent of the policy. And I would, even though that exact scenario I don't expect will happen here, I think that the intent of the policy, I would like to see the intent of our policy be, while this group serves as the owners of the org and the ultimate arbiters of things, that the maintenance of individual packages under our aegis is trusted to the maintainers of those packages, who may or may not be in this group. And by trusted, that means that when it makes sense, according to all of our judgment at the time, not according to some explicit document, they should be given whatever abilities we deem fit. And then when given those abilities, they should be trusted with them until we have deemed that they have misused them. And so anointing new maintainers is something that maintainers should be able to do in general, I think. And until we see that becoming a problem, I would prefer to have everything worded that in a way that trusts maintainers to grow their own ranks. It's hard enough to find new maintainers. We don't need to add bureaucracy to it.
And we just paste this into the charger.
Well, I mean, yeah.
We'll link to this spot in the YouTube video.
Right.
Okay, yeah, someone feel free to transcribe it. Let's go for it.
We only have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to suggest we take that back to the.
Yeah, that's fine. That was the thrust of my preference.
I think if we can just get some suggested wording, like it could be that, it's an extra couple sentences saying, in addition to the administrative members being being able to add and remove maintainers, they can also nominate, existing maintainers are also allowed to nominate, or whatever captures what we want, what we think makes sense. And of course, we can change this as well. It's just, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's good to have it reflect what we want. Because it's kind of like we're asking to say, hey, we'd like to have responsibility for this, and this is kind of the guidelines under which we want to operate. Okay.
So there's other things, but I just, do we want to wait until we land the charter to make the appropriate changes to the PKGGS org? Or do you want me to just start going? Because I could go and make teams for all this. I'd be happy to do that. And then I think there's some member default settings we might have to tweak to get the teams to be the thing that manages access. Do you want, are we all right with me just starting to do that, like administrative work?
I'm certainly okay. If something changes, you might have to do a bit more work, but it seems like a good idea to me.
Okay, then I'll, I probably won't do it today or anything, but I'll take a look at it soon.
Okay, we have only 1 minute, so I'm just going to say, in the next steps of support levels for package.json, the one thing I was trying to unlock was work on the tool that does the validation generation. Have scheduled a meeting for later on this week. I think it's Thursday. The link is in that issue. So if anybody else is interested, welcome to come. And that's kind of the last thing on that. And we're exactly at 4. Anything else we think we need to talk about, or should we close out for today?
I had added a label on issue 348, the housekeeping one. I think I have 2 questions there. One is the approvals. So I think I have the approvals, just need to wait out and merge the issue. The other one is the existing repos, they may have code of conduct, contributing, and PR templates on them. Do we want to remove those and just rely on the central one, or do we want to keep the individual ones? Are they customized yet?
I think we should remove them, shouldn't we?
Okay, I'll update my PRs then.
So that's for the things in the PKJS org versus the CI ones? Yeah.
Yeah. No, the CI ones, they will have the individual ones. Yeah.
Right,
but
yeah,
the
okay.
PKGJS ones, they will rely on the .github repo. Okay, good. I'll update my pull request and get ready. Speaking of CI Travis config, next time.
Okay, right. Okay. Talk to everybody later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.